and I've been reading a few things, and I want to put to rest that rumor that I was an intellectual in high school. I don't think there is such a thing, but I did read a lot, and so it sort of makes sense that I'm selling books for a living. But I was just reading the Harvard Business Review last week, and this article, and I just had it blown up so everyone could see it. Basically, the title was Apocalypse Now, and the bottom line is, predictions of globalization apocalypse are way off the mark. Most types of economic activity really don't cross borders and are still largely concentrated domestically. So if there's anything to say about globalization, the best is yet to come. And if people are protesting now, just wait. I thought to sort of wrap up, when I was going to be on a panel with two academics, I talk a little bit about 50,000-foot view from what I'm reading about, and then some practical experience I had in Mexico working for Walmart when we first took over a discount chain and how globalization affected there. Number one, I just finished last night a new book by John Naisbitt. He wrote a book in 1980 that sort of revolutionized business books. It's called Megatrends. Remember that book? He accurately predicted so many things, it was sort of uncanny. He was the Notre Dame of popular press, so to speak. And his claim to fame, besides being a professor, he'd been at Harvard and a number of other schools, is he just took 50 papers a day and read them. Because, you know, the joke is that newspapers are the first draft of history. Okay. And what he was looking for, he didn't read the New York Times, by the way, or the LA Times. He read like the Seattle and the Denver and the Dallas paper, trying to get real regional trends. And when he would see the same trends in all of these markets, then he'd start putting together what became later megatrends. And he, for example, predicted that the television networks were going to decline in popularity and be a minority of the viewership, which everybody thought was goofy in 1980. They have 11% of the eyeballs now on television. So he wasn't too wrong, was he? Because he said this wasn't really hard to predict. I mean, remember Life magazine, Look magazine? They had all these popular magazines that everybody read. They're not even in business anymore. And so his new book is called Mind Trends. And he has a lot to say about globalization since he's been living in Europe for the last 6 years. His wife was a publisher in Vienna, and that's how he met her, and they lived there. He thinks that globalization not only is here to come, but it's going to be shared unequally. And he thinks a lot of the Asian countries are going to be powerhouses in this globalization, and he thinks Europe's going to get left behind. In fact, his chapter on Europe is titled Mutually Assured Decline. Because he says Europe is doing everything within their power to make sure that they're not going to be a player in the next 50 years. They've got so many laws and so many taxes and so many restrictions. He said Google could have never started in France, nor could Microsoft because of all the laws. When's the last French company that was started after World War II that's very successful? It's not the fashion business. Luxottica for Italians. I mean, there are a few fashion things, but not too many. And how's Airbus doing these days? Yeah. Governments don't run businesses any better than they run the post office. And his point, the European model is not sustainable because Europe really believes this, that they have a great social model, and they do. I mean, the life of the worker in Europe is fabulous, but they don't work very much. They work about 70% as many hours as we do. They have almost everything guaranteed by the government, from education to medicine to unemployment to retirement. But the problem is there's so few of them to support it. And they keep pushing off the problem a little bit like we are with Social Security. Because, you know, politicians, they don't like to deal with the tough calls because they don't get any votes that way. And so he thinks in the future that the EU is going to be a declining power and that Asia is going to be something to behold. For example, the tax rate in Europe is between 40 and 50% of GDP. China is 11%. Most of Asia is all under 20%. It's really funny, if you look at the countries that are growing the fastest, the tax rate has a fairly strong correlation. And I know from doing business even in Mexico, which you wouldn't think would have a lot of rules and regulations, think again. Working for Walmart, back in the 90s, we took Walmart to purchase the largest discount chain in Mexico. and wanted to make a major thrust there. And it was a terrific market for them. But they had so many rules and regulations. I remember that we had a 150,000 foot store, the first Walmart Supercenter opening in Mexico City, and at the last minute, we couldn't open the store because some bureaucrat had determined that we didn't have enough trees in the parking lot. Now, there was a way to solve this. You know what this is? That's a dead Mexican politician. This is a live one. But Walmart didn't play that game, and they didn't know how to deal with somebody who wouldn't bribe them. So we ended up planting more trees, and we got the store open. And now that is the second most successful country for Walmart in the world, and it's doing very well. The stores are just doing terrific, and they've lowered the price of goods for everyone. So I'm going to go down from 50,000 feet a little bit down to my experience with Walmart and give you some on-the-ground experience. We took over the music and book, what's called rack jobbing, which is service distribution. We go in, we pull out the dated and non-saleable product, we put in the new releases, we re-merchandise it, we leave. It's a kind of skill that the discount store manager would not have. The music business is a pretty unique business, the book business is too. And so, first to go in, the stores were being serviced by the local, regional record labels. And one store would have 12 different record labels coming and servicing them sometimes twice a week with vans. So the vans would be full of records. The guy would come in from Warner Brothers or Capitol or whatever and put in the Capitol records and pull out the old Capitol records and come twice a week. It sounds pretty great, huh? So figure that you had 50 discount stores, 150 discount stores, counting all of their formats in Mexico City at the time. You had about 10, 12 record labels twice a week. Imagine what the traffic, what that meant with all the vans going back and forth. Okay. I mean, you look in a dictionary and the definition of congested traffic is Mexico City. You know, the definition of pollution is Mexico City. And their supply chain was about a 1930s or 1940s American model. So Walmart wanted to bring in a new supply chain and bring in all the product all at once through their trucks, which were going through the stores anyway, and use modern, sophisticated computerization to determine what record should be in that store. Well, there was a hue and cry from the record labels like we were, you know, I mean, we could have been communists and they would agree to this more warmly than coming in with this. And they balked and they refused, and they did this, they did that. Well, eventually, of course, Walmart prevailed and the business model was implemented. So here's what's happened with the business model. We lowered the cost of distribution by more than half. We lowered the cost of music and books to the consumer by a considerable amount. We improved the selection in each store because the record labels were all fighting for space and overstocking. All right. Everybody won except the guys driving the vans. Guess what the headline in the newspaper is? Hundreds of van drivers put out of work by Walmart. Okay? And so you got to remember when you're reading the paper about globalization, they don't give you the full picture. You know, Joseph Pulitzer said a century ago that you only sell newspapers by building people up and then tearing them down. You know, the media by its very nature is interested in ratings. And the only way you get ratings is by, I mean, 60 Minutes is not talking about nice things. They're trying to expose people, right? And that's why you watch it. And so just every time you see something about globalization, think about it a little bit. Who's the beneficiary? Because they don't put the beneficiaries on the front page. They don't sell newspapers. So that's my experience. And I would suggest all of you read World is Flat by Thomas Friedman. It's been mentioned by the other speakers. It's again, like all media stuff, it's overhyped, it's overgeneralized. But I think he's really on to a great idea. And if you happen to be, how many people in this room have too much time on their hands? Well, what I'd suggest, because I just spent 20 minutes driving down here from Amarillo, get the book on CD. It is a fabulous book on CD. I think it's a better audiobook than this book. And you can turn some of that downtime that you're currently not utilizing properly effectively into something that's really meaningful. But Friedman will make you think. He's a very insightful surveyor of the global scene and travels a lot, speaks a lot. He'll make you think. And then the other book I would suggest is Mindsets by John Mansfield. he talks about how things aren't really changing as fast as we think they are, and that most of the future is alive and present today. You just have to reassemble it and make it bigger. And by the way, he thinks that the next 30 years are going to be phenomenal areas for economic growth because we had this explosion of wonderful inventions in the last 20 years, the internet and all the things that came with it. And now we're going to get to amplify those into our daily lives. He said, sort of like the Renaissance, really, from a creative viewpoint, only lasted 40 years. But how many centuries did the Renaissance impact? And so we had a technology Renaissance with the microchip leading to the internet, leading to phones, leading to all this. And I think the final thing he says, and I think one of you alluded to it, and the thing we don't realize is one of the real drivers of the globalization is we had 1 billion people join it in the last 20 years. People from China, India, people from Eastern Europe, and people from Russia. And so there's going to be more competition. There are a lot more brains out there, a lot more people who want to study and get engineering degrees. And we're going to be challenged about it. And we're going to have to deal with it whether we like it or not. Thank you.
Okay, we have 15 minutes. Let's open this floor for your questions.
This is for the practitioner, Mr. Marmaduke. You know, as an academician, that's what I do here, I find there's a huge need to get reality into the classroom. I also find there's a huge need to talk about globalization, just like you did from 50,000 feet, but there's more important, bring that down to what we're teaching our kids. The future that you are, all three of you are portraying is incredibly different than what we're teaching in the classrooms. How do we make that change to effectively provide a specialized workforce to meet this need? Because I don't see it. How do we do that? And I'm talking to you because you're in the field. Not that I don't respect the other two, but I'm different. In my career, I have found that while academics are great, they're not the real world. So I want to know from you how we should do that.
Well, it's not my area of expertise. I can tell you what Walmart did. They brought down a lot of Walmart associates who had language proficiency in Spanish. Of course, what we didn't realize at the time is if you speak Spanish here, you go down there, it's a caste system. They're going to make fun of your accent. I mean, you must sound like Barney Fife to them. I don't know. But when you speak Tex-Mex to them. And so everybody had to sort of go through a language refresher course like that. But I think the most important thing is just getting people to have experiences. You know, I think the thing that we don't realize about American workers is we have initiative and we have social capital that the rest of the world lacks. We just take it for granted. You know? I mean, look, I'll give you a perfect example. I was talking to a multinational executive, and he said, you know, I was asking him, what's the difference in the Chinese and all this and the rest of the world, workers in the rest of the world? But we all know they work hard. In fact, they work harder than we do in a lot of cases. But he said, let me give you an example. If I left my office and I'm gone for a week, when I get back, my secretary in the United States is taking care of everything. She's taken initiative. She's done things without being asked and all this kind of thing. I can guarantee you in China, they will not do one thing. And that's the difference in the American initiative. Now, they are slowly developing that initiative. And, but I don't think we realize how much of a cultural advantage we have over the rest of the world. And so if we can just couple that by not having a second-class science and engineering kind of education, which is what we lack, I don't think anybody's going to take anything away from us. Now, let me say one other thing. Don't forget, there's more profit made in one hit movie than in all the DVD players sold. They're, you know, we talk about all these big numbers, but they're in the commodity business. It's a very low profit business. Steven Spielberg isn't in the commodity business, and he knows how to make big bucks.
add something to that from the perspective of how do you get this into the experience of the students. Many of you in here today are students, right? How many of you have gone and studied abroad? Put your hands up. One?
What about international students?
Okay, international students are studying abroad, so put your hands up, right? Yeah, international students are studying abroad right now. That's what they're doing. Right? You know, this is one of the things that I think is real unfortunate about most American students is that we in the United States have a pretty low rate of student exposure to things international. And I think step number one is to simply get them a passport, get them on an airplane, get them out of the country, push them through culture shock, doing whatever you need to have them do. I'm a big promoter of study abroad programs, of internships abroad, and all these kinds of things because for many people, that's a real life-changing experience. And they can relate that back to business activities because, of course, business is involved in practically everything that goes on. So, and the second best thing that we can do, I think, is to do what you obviously have done here, is to try to get a lot of international students to come here, so that the experiences that our students have on campus are with people from other parts of the world. They can sit around and, just shoot the bull with them and have coffee and whatever, and learn about their countries and these kinds of things. And very often, of course, friendships will strike up, or perhaps if it's not a friendship, they'll at least become aware of some other country, excuse me, and maybe begin to pay more attention to that place in the news and get more of a sense that there's something else out there beyond the horizons besides the borders. So that's one thing I think in terms of experience of students on U.S. campuses that we should be promoting. The U.S. government has set goals of around 20% of students at American universities and colleges that they have experience abroad before they graduate. Those are kind of low. There's a number of private schools nowadays that are setting this as a requirement for graduation. Goal being 100% of students. If you're going to get a degree from our college, you will have a study abroad experience, or we're not giving you a degree. That's step one, and I think that internationalizing people in that way is sometimes brutal, but very worthwhile.
Yes, I must say that this university has just set a standard of 20% of the undergraduate students graduating with a study abroad, and we are organizing exchange programs. I'm a big proponent of those, of course.
Excellent.
And taking study abroad. I'm going to take a group of students to Russia next summer. So we are doing it.
I might add to that it's a good idea to get the faculty to go too.
Beyond what y'all are already doing, like promoting 20% of students studying abroad, what other role do you think academics has in expanding and helping the students in globalization? Do you feel that there will be more American universities abroad or foreign universities on our soils? For all the doctors, what do you think the academia will do to help promote globalization?
I think globalization starts at home. And the key is some of the faculty members themselves are not really, regardless of what, there are some faculty members who are familiar with globalization. The vast majority of them still don't like it. You think they know, they don't. So unless a person buys the whole concept of globalization, they're not going to pass it on to their students. So it's it depends upon the course. If you're teaching an international course, obviously you're going to be talking about globalization, its importance. But there are many people, sad to say, many of our faculty members who buy that. They say, well, this is a passing phase, this is fad, perhaps. So they are, to an extent, doing a disservice to the students.
Could I offer a challenge to John? And that is that since you have some connection with, and perhaps currently some operations in Mexico, maybe you could offer some internships to students here at West Texas that might be able to go and work abroad and come back and go through culture shock and all those things and learn a little out on the ground.
Well, unfortunately, I'm no longer involved with Walmart, so the Mexico connection is historical, but we do offer interns, not only here, but in many of our stores, and find some of our best executives. In fact, our Vice President of Information Technology started as an intern at New Mexico State some 15 years ago. So it's a great way to get Well, we like to, the great thing about students is that they're so quick to learn, and they're just like a sponge, and the faster you throw stuff at them, the quicker they learn it. And so we fast track them, and they have a lot of fun, we have a lot of fun.
Other questions? We still have a few minutes.
Well, how do you all assess the forces that oppose globalism? What's the trend in the world today on things like, say, nationalism, politically, ideologically, backlashes against globalism? And one area that I'm particularly curious about is agricultural subsidies. It seems to be a perennial problem. What's happening there?
Well, obviously, when you look at globalization, the countries which are gaining are the emerging economies, so they are much in favor of it. The ones who are not really in favor of it are the developed economies, say some in Europe in particular, I would say, and of course here in the United States as well. And they are the ones who are being impacted, as I mentioned earlier, because of the change in the production systems, which is going to lay off people in certain fields. If you look at GM, for example, GM is going to shut down a lot of plants in the US, but going to open up plants in China and India. So who's going to gain? So the people who are getting hurt are the ones here. So it's a question of retraining and moving to other jobs. So that's why you see more backlash here, and not so much in the developed world. And agriculture has historically been a distorted sector of most economies, and the subsidies are tremendous in Europe. We have the CAP, Common Agricultural Policy, which is the biggest budget item in European Union. The US, we have a problem as well. And that really distorts global trade in agriculture. So although you do still have efficient agricultural production countries in the developed countries of the world, they are not able to produce because so much of the agricultural surpluses are dumped into the international market, depressing prices at which they cannot produce. So that's why the recent failure of the Doha Accord, if you've been following that, is largely because of that. So the developing countries have said, well, enough, we're not going to go to more liberalization unless you first take care of this agricultural subsidy. And it's a big stumbling block. And as John mentioned, politicians don't want to handle the hot potato. They would like to go for the easy ones. And so you're going to have this bickering.
Well, I'm for welfare reform, and I think we need to get business off welfare. And I think probably the worst bill that was passed by local Congressman Larry Combest, who is now a lobbyist. And that was this large, we really had the American agricultural subsidies under control and declining, and then we passed this new bill with just an enormous entitlement. Even the farmers I know think it's too much. And I don't think politically it's needed because that's not where the votes are. Now that may be where the lobbyists are, and that's where, a lot of donations go. But politically, I don't think it's that brave to say, all we have to do is move the Iowa caucus, and I think we'd have everything solved.
You remember the WTO meetings in Seattle and all the street battles and things that were going on? When I watched that, the word that came to my mind to describe those folks was a word from a long time ago, Luddites. Anyone here know what a Luddite is? Yes. Yeah. If you're not familiar with that term, you might go look it up. It describes people who have battled against these kinds of things in centuries past. Ag subsidies, I agree, are a problem. I think they will continue to be a problem. If you look at the structure of the political systems in a great many democracies around the world, you see that there's a disproportionate amount of political power that has been structurally given to agricultural interests. And it's not entirely irrational in the sense if you think about governments looking at the world in terms of Maslow's hierarchy and saying, okay, what's the first thing we have to have for people to be happy here? We got to have food, right? So there's a lot of effort put in to make sure that people are well fed. And sometimes that gets in the way of other things, especially when the agricultural interests are involved in more industrial kinds of production as opposed to just simple putting meals on the table.
I have a question that Mr. Marmaduke kind of made me think about. You said that China I guess, getting on their growth rate is just so immense because, they do have lower taxes, around 11%, you said. And also they're allowing much more foreign investing, less control, associated with that. So that was going to be declining based upon the tax rate. What do y'all think politically, as far as America and Europe allowing foreign investments in here, like the buy boards? What do you think? How do you think that will change? And related to how prosperous China is right now, them allowing foreign control and lower tax rates. Do you think the rest of the world will kind of, feed off that and maybe lower their tax rates and increase foreign control? Or do you think that's just kind of like a milestone that we'll never get over?
Well, I think the whole issue of foreign investment has been hyped. The largest recipient of foreign investment, direct foreign investment, is the United States. Okay, by far, it's about $250 billion a year. Second is UK. China comes, they are around fifth or so.